What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the season finale of the Amazon Prime original series, Invincible. This will follow season 2, episode 8, which is called I Thought You Were Stronger. Okay, so here we are. Second season finale is finally here, 4 short episodes later. And boy, howdy, this was a very difficult, very brutal episode. Not in the violence department, but just on what Mark has to deal with, what he's going to do in the future, and how difficult his life has been ever since his father kind of left. And how he's having to deal with this on his own, his split with Amber, and his eventual, what is the worry that he's going to become as a superhero? Is it going to become the supervillain's like state of affairs? Is it going to be something bigger, bolder? It's, it is what it is. It's very much a way for a character to develop into a much more interesting kind of archetype in a lot of respects. And so with this episode, we kind of get the end of Angstrom Levy, who is a villain in this series. He's a villain that holds Mark very much responsible for the fact of what he became, who he is. He's a villain that can hop dimensions, and as we see in the first 20 minutes of this episode, which is what pretty much Angstrom Levy's arc kind of concludes with, he is very much an individual who confronts Mark with the idea of what Mark could become. So we see as Mark is basically hopping dimensions, not by his own accord, but what Angstrom Levy is doing to him while he's holding his Mark's family hostage, is we get shadows and ideas and flashbacks and flash forwards and whatever you want to call it of what Mark could be in certain scenarios. So whether it be him as, a super god, as him as a super violent god, as him as somebody who can do things at all powerful. It just shows you what different dimensions do with this particular character. And it also has fun with it too, which was kind of a little nice lighthearted moment where of course we got the dinosaurs, which are these talking dinosaurs that feel very much like homages to the Dinobots. And then he, talks to characters that look like Spider-Man and Doc Ock, and then he makes a joke about how why is it doesn't reference Batman, but it's like why are you called Batman? Basically, we see the cape, but in essence, Mark is to have the kind of a little bit of fun as he's trying to save his family, and Angstrom Levy is basically torturing him by basically allowing this guy to teleport into different dimensions and him kind of mess with them and kind of change his psychology and psychosis for a much more darker individual than Mark wants to become. And he gets stuck in different dimensions for quite a while, to the point where time is kind of a flux. You're not entirely sure how long Mark's been gone, but it finally leads to Mark is able to bring Angstrom Levy into this realm that looks like almost like Mars or the moon or something like that. And Mark starts to show his Nolan side, his father's side, when he absolutely devastates and destroys and pummels and just completely eviscerates Angstrom Levy, which is kind of what Angstrom Levy's point was trying to be, is to bring the kind of demonistic side of Mark's humanistic approach, his psychology out into the open. And it's a very dark moment watching Mark trying to struggle with the death of what he caused, how he is almost becoming as like his father. It really starts to show through this entire episode. In the when he's flying around and he's struggling, when he sees the chaos that his life has created to his mom, who gets her arm compound fractured, and the kid almost killed. And it really is a really unsettling thing to watch, because it is so powerful thing to see, and so visceral in what it's trying to do. And it's very much kind of similar. It's not similar, but it's kind of like what happened at the end of season 1, where Mark has been proven to be kind of an undervalued person in a lot of respects when it comes to a superhero, because he's not very strong. He gets brutally destroyed by, of course, his father. His father goes on a murderous rampage, and we're starting to see the inklings of the worrisome that Mark is having of him becoming the same thing, and watching him destroy Angstrom Levy to his death, and watching all the blood that he gets on him, watching all the blood that squirts everywhere. It's very much watching a human being, watching a person who is good in nature fall to a dark side like Luke Skywalker did but to an extent, like Anakin Skywalker or something like that. And it was very brutal to watch. It really was. I really appreciate it. Like, when I say brutal, I mean, like, it's a very interesting, very thought-provoking, very well-produced episode that is just, it makes you, like, your heart sink, and it makes your, like, brain just kind of go full throttle into like this thinking of, like, who we are as a human being, how we approach situations, how do we do it either in a good or bad way, how our decisions affect and conflux the chain of events, and so on and so forth. And that's what I really appreciated about what Mark's struggle has been through these last 4 episodes is, what do you have to do to become better, and are you willing to sacrifice yourself to do the better, but also what would happen if you're kind of conflicted, and what would happen if you're kind of, put onto the dark side of the situation. And that's what this episode does in spades, especially this episode, but the last 4 episodes, is really show that hard nature to what Mark is as an individual. And when he sees the world around him collapsing, when he sees his mother in peril, when he sees the world being just completely destroyed, it's a really fascinating thing to see what Mark will do to save his family and stuff like that. But there's also a nice little moment why he's like conflicted, where the Guardians of the Globe, in much older form, appear to Mark because Mark's trying to figure out a way to get back to his home. And they explain, like, you don't want to know what happens to you if you're stuck on this planet. You don't want to know what happens to Earth when you're gone for 20 years, because they're gone. These Guardians of the Globe, which include Adam, Eve, and Rex and stuff like that, they just don't want to tell him, but they want him to realize that the future is undetermined. You gotta discern, you gotta decide what you want to do about it. And it also leads, of course, Adam and Eve to admit that she was always in love with Mark, which is a kind of story arc through the entire Invincible series, which, if you read the comics or the graphic novels, that was coming. But it's really interesting, as somebody who doesn't really know the graphic novel very well, to see that even though you kind of can figure that it's coming, that it's going to happen, that the idea of Mark and Amber was such a tragic love tale that you kind of miss that's pretty much going to go by the wayside. I don't know if, Zazie Beetz is going to come back as Amber, if there's going to be a storyline there or not, but it feels like when he goes and visits her and he looks at her and he just leaves her alone, that maybe that storyline's over, and we're going to get into Adam, Eve, and of course Mark's future, which I won't spoil. If you know, but I won't spoil what happens there. But Adam, Eve, in the 20 years, Adam, Eve says, tell her you love her. Tell her you love her, that you want to be with her. And in the end, Mark goes and visits her, but decides not to say anything, which is very much a Mark thing. He's like, he's an individual like Superman in a lot of respects, where the worry is the future of people he loves and cares about. And that's what I feel like is going to happen. But it's going to be really interesting to see in the 3rd season where Mark's arc goes, not knowing much about the Invincible series as a comic book stuff. But it's going to be a very interesting kind of gray and white situation where Mark is going to have to struggle with who he should be versus who he's going to be. And I really think that's a really fascinating thing to idolize and stuff like that, and kind of look into and kind of pinpoint down to what he could eventually become, which is he's a powerful individual. He shows he's a powerful individual. He's a guy who gets his ass kicked all the time, but he is underneath. He is a Viltrumite, half Viltrumite, and he is very, very dangerous. And it's going to be interesting to watch how that plays out in the next few seasons. Because I finally saw the graphic novel on Nimbuses and stuff like that. There's a lot of story to tell. You could tell like 10 seasons of the Invincible series and get through probably the first. I mean, they're not even through the first book yet, or the first volume of this on Nimbus series, and I'm really interested to see how it's going to play out. But I love Deborah as a character in this, because you see the fallout of her and kind of the sadness of what she goes through, almost losing her son, almost losing Oliver, the fact that she is now has PTSD problems. She goes back home. She's been, like I said, destroyed with her arm has been compound fractured. She's been in, like a room, like a hospital room. She comes home. She looks around and everything feels different. She even tells Mark it feels very, very different now. Like things are not the same. And then on top of everything, Mark decides he's going to quit college because he feels, that his abilities need to be more, that need to be something, they need to be, as I've said, that need to change into something much more bigger and bolder, and whether good or bad, we'll see in the future. But she's like, you can't do that. There's much more. College is just not about taking classes. It's about becoming yourself as an individual about who that individual is. But Mark is very much in a molding stage where like the clay is not fully molded to him, but so he doesn't really feel the same way. So I think the college thing is out the window, but we'll see like with Rick and William if that stuff plays out, where that goes. If Mark continues college or not, but I don't think it will. But once again, going back to everything I've talked about, it really much is, what do you do when you have abilities to change for the better or good? How do you focus yourself on that? Where are the rights and wrongs, and what do the rights and wrongs succeed, and what do they tell you to to go into this world that could be a devastating thing? And I just really love Mark's kind of conflicting nature of that. But that's where it kind of leaves off with, Mark and, like I said, Adam and Eve are going to have some really interesting kind of chemistry through the next season. We'll see where that plays out. But talk about Duplicate, apparently not dead, as it does in comic book lore. She basically duplicated herself to go off to the Guardians of the Globe. She was worried about herself getting killed, which is kind of what happened. And when the Immortal decides he's leaving, he goes to his cabin and she's there, and they're reunited, which once again, very much humanistic, very much a cool moment to give Immortal some kind of justification for not only the third season, but to give him, even if this is the last episode, if it were the last episode, some kind of closure to that situation. So I thought that was a really appreciative. And then, of course, Monster Girl and Rudy, that whole situation that has kind of been playing out through the whole entire series or the season, where Rudy's trying to calm down Monster Girl, is really worried about her. She's like very much affected because of the fact that she gets younger and younger. It's basically him kind of being overzealous with her, kind of being like an over follow figure to her. And there's kind of like what would happen in a season ending kind of closure or closing moments where she's like, let me be who I need to be. Don't always, just let me be, and we can be friends. And they had to have their moment there, which I thought was another great. Those two storylines get kind of a wrap up, at least for this season, on what was been kind of a running storyline about how Rudy's been very overprotective of Monster Girl, and then of course Mortal being very saddened by what happened to Duplicate, but he gets that kind of resolution. So I really thought that was kind of a very nice moment, I guess you could say. The last thing to talk about in this episode is, of course, Alan and Nolan. Nolan, of course, is being brutally beaten by his own people. He takes on some robots. That's another thing that happens. Like the robots, he destroys and tears in half and stuff like that. And he constantly gets beaten by the leader of the Viltrumites. And you're like, oh well, in order to execute a Viltrumite, they had to be healthy. But there's nothing about bruises or anything like that in the book, that you can't have bruises. So it's a really fun thing to see. But Alan's whole story arc, his whole idea, is the nature of getting Nolan out of prison to take him back to Thaddeus and get him back with his son. So when Alan is being taken to his cell, he actually, with his psychic abilities, talks to Nolan in their cell, and you get something that really is an interesting dimensional character aspect that you don't really see in a lot of comic books or movies. It's the nature of how Nolan is so guilty, so stricken by grief of what he's done, and how Mark and Deborah have changed him, that he worries and fears that if he goes back to him, it will completely destroy the whole entire existence of who he is, because him as a Viltrumite is an individual that is very powerful, that had a specific purpose when he went to Earth, and here he is, bloodied, bruised, beaten, a guy who had another kid with another woman, and the last words out of his mouth and the last words of this episode is he misses his wife. That's a pretty big thing in the aspect for somebody you have to despise for what he did to the population of the world that he was living on for 20 plus years or whatever, however long when Mark was around and he met Deborah, because it's insane. Like, you now feel sorry for this guy, which you shouldn't feel sorry for. But it's the nature of what this series is capable of doing in 16 episodes or 17, whatever it's been now, where they could take someone so despicable, someone so evil, the guy who basically massacred the whole Guardians of the Globe, and turn him into this very sympathetic, very sad, very heartfelt character who realizes what his trajectory was, the wrong trajectory. What he wants is not what he used to want. what he cares about is something that was false to him, or not false to him. What he used to care about is false to him now. And watching Alan and what he's going to do, and watching Nolan go on an adventure or whatever they're going to do in the third season, which I had a feeling like this, the fact that this episode was still having, last episode had really nothing with Nolan in it. I had a feeling that they were going to push a lot of this stuff to the third season because it makes a lot of sense. You can give it a lot more focus, and there's a lot of stuff going on in this season in general, just with Mark's psychology or psychosis. But watching Nolan basically realize that he's not a human, but he has humanistic abilities and approaches to his psychology, and watching that play out, it's a really powerful emotional moment that I felt was something that, once again, you rarely see it in a lot of storytelling aspects, or when you see it, it's mostly dramas and stuff like that. Watching them use that in a comic book series is a really fascinating thing. Spider-Man 2 did a lot of this as well, where characters are put into situations where they have to make mistakes and use their abilities for either good or bad, and it's just, I find this series Invincible so compelling in what it's trying to do and what it has done. And once again, it is following the graphic novel pretty closely, so I'm assuming that a lot of this stuff happens in the first volume or the first few volumes or first few pages or whatever, that it really is making me want to go back and actually read the stuff to actually learn about it, to actually go through it. But I worry that I'm going to have much more lessening opinion whether just to go through the TV series instead of the comic books. So, but in the end, I thought this was an absolutely amazing last episode for the season. I thought it did a lot of interesting stuff. I thought it went very, very dark, but also had a lot of lightening of what a character could be and who the character could be. And I'm very much excited for what season 3 will bring, because if it's anything like these last 2 seasons, it's going to be absolutely brilliant storytelling. It does move pretty quickly through the seasons, so maybe lessen it a little bit, but I still have to give this episode a 10 out of 10. It's just, it's not even about the brutality. It's about the psychosis of being more and how that affects the whole. So anyways, with that said, that will do it. That will be my take on not only the season finale of Invincible season 2, but as well as episode 8, which is called I Thought You Were Stronger. The season as a whole, I'm probably gonna give like a 9.5 out of 10. It's just absolutely brilliant stuff, and really, if you go back and watch it from the beginning, there's some really interesting look into psychosis, the psychology of a human being. So, but once again, thank you so much for joining me on season 2 of Invincible, the last 4 episodes of the season. Comments below, what do you think of this episode? What do you think of the season overall? Do you see interesting arcs going on in the third season? What do you think? Otherwise, if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome, hit that like button, and as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out.